after Watergate, Nixon resigned, um, Mrs. Graham, who was both a towering figure at the Washington Post and also in your own life, wrote you and Carl a letter
Yes.
that you talk about it probably once a month.
Yeah, once a month.
I don't know.
Oh, no, I hope not once a month. Certainly not to you. You've heard me tell this story. But what was interesting about Katharine Graham is she had a lot of insecurity, but she was a truth teller. And I remember once, many years after Watergate, before the letter, I was on television, one of Meet the Press or something, as one of these talking heads, and uh, afterwards I'm at the Post in the office, and she called and said, "I saw you on television." I said, "Oh, thank you, Mrs. Graham." She said, "You were awful." And
so she's rougher than I am sometimes.
yeah, and
Mhm.
she said, "You're smirking,
Mhm.
and you can't smirk," and it's true. So anyway, this letter she wrote Carl and myself after Nixon resigned, and it was on a yellow legal pad paper, one
Mhm.
sheet. Dear Carl and Bob, uh, now Nixon's resigned, and you did some of the stories. Don't start thinking too highly of yourselves. And that's a jolt in itself. And then she said, let me give you some advice. And the advice is beware the demon pomposity. Beware the demon pomposity. Such good advice.
Did it initially prick you a bit that she would think she needed to write you that letter?
Well, no, I thought she's right about me, about Carl, about everyone in journalism. And we see it now in uh, it's so visible. It just slaps you in the face on cable news. Lots of people talking with certainty. This is the way it is. There's no alternative, and on both sides. And it does not serve. And this, of course, was the genius of Fred Hyatt. He had none of
No pomposity.
no. I mean, not in his little finger was there pomposity.
Which is quite unusual for somebody in a position of issuing judgments
Yes,
daily.
exactly. Precisely.
So, what was the relationship between Mrs. Graham? I always call her Mrs. Graham rather than Kay, and Ben, and then your relationship with Ben.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Ben
Bradley.
Yeah, the editor and Catherine had a great relationship, and they both in their memoirs talk about it endlessly. I had a relationship with Ben, but I mean, let me, I just thought of this when I was hired by the Post. It was the metropolitan editor and the personnel department that did the hiring. They said, you're hired, but you have to go through, there's one final test, and you have to have an interview with Bradley. And he doesn't say no, except in unusual cases. But this is so. The Post was undergoing one of its endless renovations, and had a little office like this. And I remember it was dark, except there was a light on the table. And I went in, and he said, "Oh, you were in the Navy?" And I said, "Yes." We talked for 20 minutes about the Navy, because his time in World War II in the Navy, as he has said many times, was one of the most important times of his life, to be in the Pacific in combat and to be this young naval officer who is dealing in a survival world.
But I also think he said it was the most fun he ever
Yeah.
had that sort of sense of camaraderie. So
Yeah,
you
I
didn't
think
talk
Ben,
about.
Ben always had fun. I do not be suspicious of the idea that something was the
The
most
most
fun.
fun.
I think, but what he was a prowler in the newsroom. You remember, he would
Yes.
he would see two people, three people at the water cooler, and he'd be over there and say, "What's going on? What's happening?" He'd come by my desk, your desk, and what do you hear? What do you see? And
What
it's
made
like,
him different as an editor, as a leader?
well, he had that self-confidence. He had that curiosity, suspicion. No one pushed him around, no one at all. And I remember once having editing a story that a reporter had about the Democratic nominee against Reagan in 1984. This was Walter Mondale.
Uh-huh.
And it was a very questionable transaction of Mondale getting $100,000 from some business. And I remember going asking Ben about it, and I said, "Ben, we got to cover." He said, "Yeah, okay, cover." And then the story was done, and I went in and said, "You got to put it on the front page." And it was just, he was not partisan, but he knew that there was a political contest going on, and he wanted to be careful, and he put it on the front page. He understood the obligation to make those calls, and that was something clearly to admire.